Hello, Facebook. I'm on here tonight with Jordan Hall. We're going to be talking about this Mortification of Spin podcast that I linked on my wall earlier this morning from the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. This was with, Carl Truman, Todd Pruitt, and Amy Bird talking once more about Carl Truman's piece on Is Tim Keller a Marxist? So, a lot here that we need to speak to. So give me just a second. I'm going to make this public so you folks can share this wherever and people can see it. Okay, so now I think we're rolling now. So again, I've got JD Hall with us tonight as we're going to be walking through this podcast. So, hey, JD.
Hey, Robert.
All right, so I'm going to just, I guess, to set this up, Carl Truman did a blog not too long ago over on White Horse Inn. Was it White Horse Inn or Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals? It was Alliance.
The blog was at White Horse Inn. That's where he wrote the article.
I got you. Okay, White Horse Inn. So anyway, going through the subject of is Tim Keller a Marxist? And I don't know if you read it differently or heard it differently than me, but at the end of the day, what he was saying is, no, he's not a Marxist because he believes in original sin. I mean, that was his comprehensive answer, or whatever you want to call it, to is Tim Keller a Marxist?
Well, it was even broader than that. It was that he is a theist. He's not a Marxist. And this is what set me off. I couldn't believe my ears. Here's Carl Truman, a man that I want to say I respect. I don't know that I do anymore. The argument was so vapid and ignorant of Marxism in the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. I couldn't believe that he was arguing essentially, if you're a theist, you can't be a Marxist, which is just an idea that's historically asinine, and he doubled down in this latest podcast.
Yes. So I listened to this podcast this morning and I'm like, is he going to actually get into any more details as to why Tim Keller is not a Marxist, to set the record straight from that vapid answer? Because I read the blog post and I did a 2-hour response on it, detailing why Tim Keller is very cozy with social Marxism. And, so I thought this morning, maybe he's going to talk about more of, some substance to why Tim Keller isn't a Marxist. And I guess we can see what it is as we, what they said today, and get some conversation going. So I'm going to play it and you just tell me when to click stop.
Okay.
Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Truman, Todd Pruitt, and Amy Bird. Mortification of Spin is a weekly podcast from the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin. My name is Todd Pruitt, and I'm joined as always by Amy Bird and Carl Truman. We're really happy that you joined us today. We want to step into the waters of controversy. Our friend Carl Truman seems to always be getting himself in trouble with the wrong people. And some of you may already know where I'm going with this. Not long ago, Carl published a very controversial piece wherein he made the stunning claim, and I say stunning claim intentionally here, people. Carl Truman made the stunning claim that Tim Keller is not, in fact, a literal Marxist.
Let's stop there. The first thing I noticed when I was listening to this is his use of the word like literal, like he's not a literal Marxist. It's so stunning. Well, if you followed Tim Keller for any period of time, if you've paid attention to what has been written about him by Tim Shaughnessy, is it Shaughnessy? At the Trinity Review, I think Tim Shaughnessy might be
yeah.
a different guy. Tim Kaufman, that's it. Then it would surprise you that anyone would argue seriously that he's not a Marxist, unless you don't know what Marxism is. But what he was arguing isn't that he just wasn't a cultural Marxist. He was arguing, an economic Marxist, a classical Marxist. He was arguing that he wasn't a cultural Marxist. But what made people so upset isn't that he made a truth claim that cannot be verified and in fact can be strongly negated with evidence and quotations from Tim Keller himself. What made people frustrated is that he did so in such a way that is what can be best characterized as intellectual vapidity, without trying to substantiate his assertion that it's silly to call Tim Keller a Marxist. Now, as we play this clip, I want your listeners to pay attention to how dismissive these three are of any claim that Tim Keller can be a Marxist. They're dismissive of it without providing any evidence otherwise or getting into the concept of Marxism or what it is at all.
Right. Generous Justice. Have you read that book?
No.
I mean,
I've read the excerpts provided at Trinity Review.
Yeah, I mean, just taking, actually, I'm meant to have it here with me. Pardon?
Trinity Foundation.
Trinity Foundation, yeah. I've got it, and I've read it, and it's back here in my study. I meant to have it so I could hold it up, but I was fiddling with this tech trying to get this going and left it back here. But, I mean, how you could read Generous Justice and not say, there's some real concerns here that this guy's at least flirting very positively with a lot of things that we would call cultural Marxism. I mean, that there's no basis for someone to be concerned about Tim Keller and Marxism, and it's just asinine to me in light of what the man has written.
Right, and I think Truman would say, I'm not saying or asserting that no one should be concerned about Keller. I'm just saying that he's not a Marxist. To be very specific, I am saying we should be concerned about Keller, but I'm going so far as to say he's a Marxist by the definition of Marxism. Now, these guys are who I call, if anyone reads Pulpit and Pen, you know what I call them, the evangelical intelligentsia. These are the bourgeoisie, so to speak, of the evangelical think tanks. Right. And they consider their opinion far greater than ours. As a matter of fact, they're going to say that at some point. They're going to lament what they call in this clip, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, they're going to lament what they call an unfortunate egalitarianism where anyone can share their view.
It's exceedingly condescending when they talk about people on the internet in their blog or their podcast.
Yeah, you're charitable. And I'm like, what is the degree that Amy Bird has hanging on the wall as you're lamenting an unfortunate egalitarianism where anybody's given a voice? What is her degree? Why is that squawk box on your program? I don't understand exactly. We're getting ahead of myself.
Let me go backwards to a moment, and I'll click play again. But talking about their condescension and discarding the things that other folks say, and the talk about the negativity and stuff. It's really stunning how in the first blog post it's very condescending and snooty, and then this continues as well. But just to bring us up to speed with, they got an ad here. What he said in the original blog post, it was, let's see here. Oh, and the other thing too, before I forget, where he's talking about he has some differences with Keller. Oh, we have some differences with Keller. No, I got some differences with you, brother. Right? I got some, I don't do things exactly the way you do it. And some of the things people might say about you, I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't roll it that way. There's one thing having differences with somebody, right? Brother, different ministry, you do things different way, you roll different on something or whatever. Their thing is, it's not, but basically what they're trying to do is cozy up to Tim Keller and then give themselves breathing room to, well, we don't agree on everything, but the way they're saying that is in the sense of, well, you don't agree, I don't agree with everybody on anything or everything.
We've
right?
never criticized. I say we, I mean Pulpit and Pen has never criticized Carl Truman that I'm aware of. There was one time he did a master's seminary class. Someone asked him a question about something that they had read in Pulpit and Pen about Russell Moore. Carl Truman defended Russell Moore without addressing the issue at hand. He's just like, he's a good brother in Christ. I think he's a great guy. I don't think I even said anything about it at the time. So if someone has repeatedly gone after Carl Truman, as they allege, saying he finds himself in controversy again, that's not us. So I'm not trying to pick a fight with Carl Truman. I know Phil Johnson thinks highly of him. Don't have a bone to pick with him. It's just, if you're going to talk about Marxism, know what it is. And what I was thinking of when I got to the evangelical intelligentsia part, what it strikes me as in terms of the situation is theologians who are experts when it comes to maybe the Westminster Confession of Faith, but have no idea what communism is. They don't have a good understanding of the geopolitical climate, of theories like Austrian economics or capitalism or socialism, and the difference between these things politically. And someone with some graduate education in political science like myself, I think I have maybe a better grasp than they do. And also I read. And that's what I want to get to, and we should get back to the clip, because I want to demonstrate these are people that simply don't know what they're talking about when it comes to politics. And that's what essentially communism and socialism, capitalism is. These are political ideologies that take an economic form, but they're still political in theory. I don't think they know what they're talking about. So to them, it may be surprising and shocking that he would make the accusation that Keller's not a Marxist. But
I don't get the understanding, because they haven't said enough of any substance to know what they really understand or don't. But I don't think they haven't demonstrated to me they understand the difference between social Marxism and economic Marxism, or what the relationship is.
No. In his post at the Mod, the White Horse Inn subblog, he just says because he's not an atheist, he can't be a Marxist, and if he's not like a classical Marxist, he can be no kind of Marxist at all, which is asinine, because cultural Marxism was made by theists.
Right.
It was invented by theists like Gustavo Gutierrez.
Like, are you kidding me? This is the answer to this thing that many of us out here are really, really concerned about, these trends we see going down in reformdom. Anyway, let me get back to the clip. Let's get it rolling.
What do you have to say to yourself? Or for yourself, I'm saying. I'm sure you say all kinds of things to yourself, but what do you have to say for yourself?
Well, it's interesting. That article actually did not arise. I was not sitting around thinking, what shall I write on? I know I'll defend Tim Keller from the charge of Marxism.
Right.
I was approached and asked if I would write it. And
let's stop there for a second.
Really?
Who approached him and asked him to write it?
Oh, what do you say there?
It's got my discernment spider senses tingling. He says, and later he says in just a moment, when I agreed to write it, and I'm going, who asked him to write this? And he's going to say, I'm not an acolyte of Tim Keller. Why are you doing favors for him then? Let's be honest. Who asked you to write it? Tim Keller asked you to write it. Then you agreed to write it. And you're like, I'm not an acolyte of Tim Keller. No, it's the evangelical intelligentsia. Google that. The number one result will be Pulpit and Pen. The evangelical intelligentsia, they stick together. That's what they're doing.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know whether Tim Keller asked him to write it or not, but it very clearly came across to me as the circling of the wagons of the evangelical intelligentsia. That clearly the players at hand who are going off after all of this social Marxism, again, I wouldn't have thought Carl Truman. I mean, some of the things going on over at White Horse Inn, Amy Bird commenting that we need to look at egalitarian interpretation of key texts about women's roles in the church and teaching. I don't know if you saw that piece or not. But I would have never thought.
I've not been paying close attention to what's been happening at the White Horse Inn. Mike Abendroth apprised me of what was going on when I saw him in Canada a few weeks ago, because NOCO has been paying, I guess, more attention to it. Amy Bird plays an important role. I want people to understand this. If you can put two and two together, For the revoice, same-sex attracted normalization that's happening in evangelical Christianity, when you have guys like Sam Alberry, you know, the homosexual Episcopal priest, speak at Gospel Coalition events, and you have vocational ministers who are effectively, you know, they consider themselves Christian eunuchs. They're going to be single and gay and see homosexuality as part of their identity. In order for them to serve in the pastorate, they have to spend time alone with men. All right? They're gay, and they have to spend time alone with men, because as a pastor, Robert, you know, you have to counsel men. I have to counsel men. So the question is, how does a homosexual follow the Billy Graham rule or the Mike Pence rule and keep ourselves above reproach?
Oh, if you read Amy Bird on that very subject,
Exactly.
she questions all of that as far as being able to have friends of the opposite sex and how we shouldn't be
intimate friends. And so you understand, you can't have like a Sam Alberry gay clergy member who's doing his job as a pastor, counseling and dealing with men, if you've got the Billy Graham rule. So Amy Bird comes in as a part of the evangelical intelligentsia, trying to dismantle the Billy Graham rule altogether and act like it's crazy. We've been crazy this whole time for walking with integrity and purity in our pastoral ministry.
As a pastor, I've been a pastor for 20 years, full time in the ministry for 11, almost going on my 12th almost, and the idea that I would go along with what Amy Bird is saying is absolutely asinine, or that I would counsel men to go along with that.
Bible thumping wingnut has done a good job of explaining the problems with Amy Bird. I haven't written much about it, but this is exactly why a woman ought not to teach. Amy Bird.
I mean, if you want an example, she's a good one to. At least the stuff I've been seeing coming out from her on White Horse Inn has been really, you know, is she going to be like the Reformdom's version of Beth Moore, you think?
Well, right now, Beth Moore is the Reformdom version of Beth Moore.
That's true.
Because she's hanging out with Tabitiana Bwile and Russell Moore and Tim Keller. And so all of the neo-cows love Beth Moore is actually hanging out in Reform circles these days. So let's get to that clip. I want to get my butcher knives out here.
Somebody's actually got to write this piece. It took me about 45 minutes to knock it off one Thursday afternoon and send it in. Just struck me as that I was stating the obvious. Yeah. Quite fascinating, the reaction. Most fascinating is the fact that clearly some people read it as me comprehensively endorsing everything Tim Keller has said in the past, in the present, and will say in the future. And, you know, I try to write clear as I can.
I didn't hear anyone say that. It sounds like a straw man to me, and there were a number of straw men in this podcast that they did. I never said that.
Anybody can say that of anybody. I don't agree with anybody 100%. I could give a critique somewhere of anybody. I mean, that's so. On the one hand, it's like he's trying to distance himself, but from the other hand, it's like, but what about these really serious concerns that people have that you're just completely disregarding and rolling your eyes against while providing a lame answer of he's a theist, so he can't be a Marxist? I mean, talk about dodging the entire subject.
Twice now, in the article and then in this podcast.
Right.
Yep.
Maybe this sentence is a little ambiguous. Let me be clear, while respecting him as a brother in Christ, I'm not an acolyte of Reverend Keller. I disagree at points with both his theology and philosophy of ministry, nor do I share his love of the city. And I'm definitely not an optimistic transformationist as he is. I guess reading that, I can understand why some people came away thinking that I am an acolyte. I totally agree with everything you've ever said theologically or philosophically. But boy, do I love the city. Why I moved to. Guess what? I live just outside Grove City. That's why I moved from Philadelphia, so I can enjoy a truly urban environment.
For the Grove City. Yeah. And just as a little bit of background here, obviously there have been concerns raised among a lot of evangelicals and both Southern Baptists and Presbyterians about the rise of an emphasis that some see as unhealthy on issues of, quote, social justice. And Tim Keller has taken a lot of heat over this, and people have been accusing him of being a Marxist and a cultural Marxist. And so Carl writes this piece going, listen, here's what Marxism is. Here's what cultural Marxism is. I disagree with Tim Keller about a whole lot of things, but technically he's not a Marxist. And you would have thought Carl had written a long treatise on why Marxism must be embraced. And it was...
See, that's absurd. It's if you're going to answer the question, is Tim Keller a Marxist? And your only answer is he's a theist. He believes in original sin, so he can't be a Marxist. I understand it's not a lengthy treatise in a blog post. A lot of times people demand of me to give further substantiation for a point I make in a blog, and I have to remind them, Guy, that's a blog. I am not trying to write a full treatise. So I understand that issue, but at the same time, there is no argument in his post. It's asinine to claim him being a theist means he's not a Marxist, and to discount all the things that Tim Keller has tweeted, written in his books like Generous Justice, and involved himself with.
There's two issues here, and you're probably more charitable than I am, Robert, and I might be one of the few people on the planet that you can say that about. You're probably more charitable than me. When you say, I think you said a few moments ago that he's in the neighborhood of, or he seems friendly, I think you said, to cultural or social Marxists. His worldview is Marxist. So it works like this. If you believe that the poor are poor by necessity because of injustice, only then does it make sense that taking care of the poor is a matter of justice and not a matter of mercy.
Right.
It's Marxism that says the poor are poor by necessitation through poverty, not through providence, sickness, laziness, ineptitude, but it has to be injustice. That premise itself is Marxist to begin with. But the other issue is history that Truman didn't talk about, and he will not talk about it, and he's not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole, and that is when we use the term cultural Marxism, we're referring to a specific strain of Marxism that goes back to Antonio Gramsci, who was a communist politician and a Marxist philosopher in Italy. He was a communist philosopher. He came up with the concept of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. I'm sure you've heard of those terms. These are communist terms. He's the one that came up with those ideas. He started the rise of cultural Marxism, and he was a theist. And the liberation theologians in South America, who Tim Keller credits with his worldview in Generous Justice, was a theist. So I just want Truman to stop playing the victim and acting as though everybody's just picking on me all the time. I don't know. I'm not defending no one. Listen, we're just saying, get down to the business of talking about Marxism if you're going to talk about Marxism. You can't just claim he's not a Marxist because he's a theist.
Right. I mean, if it wasn't the fact that you've got, these legions of people in reformdom who just follow these popular teachers, this would be laughable.
It is laughable. It's shameful. When I wrote my post in response to Carl Trueman's article, I said, this is literally one of the dumbest things I have ever read. This is laughable. Take this to a political scientist down at your local university and ask them if it's possible for a Marxist to be a theist, and they're going to give you a long list of Marxist theists, including, might I add, Pope Francis.
Yeah, here's the thing, too. It's Carl Trueman's not that stupid.
Can you imagine someone arguing that Pope Francis isn't a Marxist because he's a theist?
Well, because he's a pope.
We would
Pope
say
is a Marxist.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Of course Pope Francis is a Marxist. He said the other day to Michael Moore that capitalism was a sin.
Marx never wrote that the Pope could be a Marxist.
Well, it sounds like
you're just going to say stuff like they're saying. I mean, why not?
It's insane.
I got a fortune cookie at the Chinese restaurant, and it said popes can't be a Marxist. So,
right, we're just making stuff up, regardless of political theory.
Yeah. All right, we're playing.
it gave.
I write for first things. They love.
Exactly. It was a great. The response to that article was a great window into kind of the outrage machine that operates oftentimes in the Twitterverse, where actual fact.
I'm not on Twitter, by the way. I have an account, but I maybe have made 2 or 3 posts to Twitter in all my life. So whoever that wasn't me on Twitter.
Well, he says, in the Twitterverse, as opposed to, to fact, we're the ones dealing with facts. The Trinity Review dealt with facts. Tim Kaufman dealt with facts.
Well,
with facts.
Did you see Tim Keller's response to Kaufman's article?
I don't.
I saw it on Twitter. Someone posted it in conversation going on about all this, and Tim Keller had responded at some point and said, just because I cite people who are Marxists don't mean I'm a Marxist. He didn't say it quite like that, but that's what he was saying.
And credit them with the establishment of his worldview.
Correct.
Say that they were right in their Marxism. I mean, go to the Post Pulpit and Pen. Tim Keller is a Marxist, a response to Carl Truman, and you'll see the citations here provided by men who are far less polemical than myself, from his book, A Reason for God, Generous Justice, and 2 or 3 others, where he is crediting them with his understanding of justice.
Right.
So, you can cite Darwin. It doesn't mean you're a Darwinian, but if you cite Darwin and say, he had a point about natural selection, I'm going to go, you're a Darwinian.
Yeah. It's really, on the one hand, why not just come out and tell people honestly what you are? But as Truman's going to point out in this piece, you don't want to come out and say I'm a Marxist. Even people on the radical left don't want to come right out and say that these days. And it's like, so it's all this obfuscation. It's, I'm not, I'm just citing these people, whatever. And it's really dishonest.
If I could turn my iMac around, I'd show you 2 shelves in my office. As of 2005, I had every Reagan biography ever written. And I was a big Reagan fan, and still am. But in high school, loved Reagan, named my daughter after Reagan. And you can't study Reagan's life without understanding communism, because he was driven by a desire to see the fall of communism, probably because his first wife left him for a commie. That might have something to do with it. But point is, understanding, the history of the 1950s and 60s, McCarthy era. I understood very naturally, just from basic literacy, that communism is a subversive doctrine. Marxism is designed to be subversive. Mm-hmm. They don't come out and just say they're Marxists. Right. It's a subversive ideology. That's why you got to hunt them down like McCarthy did.
That's right. The class struggle and all that's built into Marxist doctrine is you're not coming right out and saying we're burning it all down to go to our Marxist utopia. No, that's not how you implement the class struggle to bring it on about.
Right. I've got a master's degree in history from Arkansas State, and I studied several race riots, including one in Hoxie, Arkansas. And the struggle for investigators was to determine the extent in those race riots of communism. Actually, communist infiltration, money coming from Russia to start racial disharmony in the United States. The importance of the civil rights movement aside, history verifies the subversiveness and the historicity of that subversiveness that's long-standing. And it's like these people aren't aware of 20th century history.
But the thing is, brother, Carl Truman, I just cannot believe he's that stupid. The way this comes across is it really is like, this guy really doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. I just, and this is, I guess, me being more pessimistic on Truman. And, I'm not a big follower of mega stars and reformdom, but at the same time, I think he knows more than, and if he does know more, this is part of subversion.
I try not to figure out what people know. Like, are they being genuinely ignorant, or are they being disingenuous? I don't know. I'd hate to say, but
I just take Carl Truman. It's like, here's a pretty smart dude. I wouldn't
Well,
think Carl,
in the realm of theology, right? An expert is just somebody that knows a lot of things about one thing. That's what an expert is.
yeah.
And it's like the pastors, Dave Miller at SBC Voices, these pastors that will advocate for, say, open borders and amnesty, and without any regard to the geopolitical situation, international law, the consequences of 6,000 illegal aliens crossing the border. And you just want to go, listen, you prepare your sermon for Sunday. Why don't you let the big boys talk about this? I'm not saying I'm one. I'm saying maybe you shouldn't be thinking about such topics, because maybe you should stick to the exposition of Exodus 21 or something. Like, I'm sure Carl Truman is astute when it comes to Presbyterian theology. Good for him. That doesn't mean that he's an expert when it comes to economics, because he clearly he either has no idea what he's talking about or he's
I'm not
disingenuous.
an expert when it comes to economics by a long shot. At the same time, I know enough of the signs and the times and the things going on to know, the major positions, where the compass points. If he's as ignorant as he comes across in this, he's speaking dogmatically to something that he is utterly imbecilic on. I mean, embarrassingly so. And again, I guess that it's hard for me to think that really is Carl Truman, that he's really that ignorant. And again, I guess that's where, we
would rather believe our brothers to be ignorant than to believe that they're not brothers.
Right. Well,
so the most generous thing we can say is that he's ignorant.
Yeah, and I didn't say, even if there's some subversion here, I'm not saying he's not a brother. That goes down a whole different track. As far as I would say, all of these things are a apostatizing trend.
Fair enough.
At the very least.
The need of the moment is all that really matters.
Yeah, and I think one of the points I'd want to make is that one of the reasons I agreed to write that article is I actually don't think the case against some of the crazy social justice stuff that's going on is helped by people mischaracterizing the position of people.
Let's stop for just a moment. So here's a guy who has never said a single word in opposition to the crazy social justice movement. He's never tried to help us out at all. And he has only defended the social justice movement. I think we rephrase that. The social gospel movement, that's what it is.
He doesn't see this as a social justice movement. He's thinking about the far left out there, outside of evangelicalism, and he's not thinking about these Reformdom's attempt to try to baptize cultural Marxism and all this nonsense that we've been seeing over the last few years, where it's like we're gonna somehow redeem this out of the world and do our Christian-y version of what they're doing.
Well, my point is, here's a guy who's never spoken up against the social justice warriors, and he says, one of the reasons I had a problem with the response to my article is I don't think it's helpful in the position against the crazy social justice warriors. And you're going, I'm pretty sure I don't want to take advice from somebody who's not on my team. It's like a Democrat saying, the problem with Sean Hannity is I just don't think that he's being helpful to the conservative cause. Well, maybe you're not the best person to listen to about what's helpful and what's not for our cause when you're not on our team.
Yeah, good point.
When you factor out the craziness of the Twitter sphere, whatever you call it, when you factor out the small but very loud-mouthed constituency on left and right that tend to dominate debates online, the vast majority of Christians are what I would call moderate, reasonable people. Mm-hmm. And nothing is likely to drive them to one extreme or the other. Nothing is more likely to do that than an extreme mischaracterization of an alternative position.
Right.
So
let me say this real quick and then move on. They're going to continually use the term slander, misrepresentation, mischaracterization. I want the listener, the viewer here, to stop, look at the article that he did at the mod, the subblog of White Horse Inn, defending Tim Keller. Look at what was produced at Pulpit and Pen. Listen to what Brother Truelove has produced. And ask yourself the question, where is the misrepresentation? Where is the mischaracterization? Where is the quote unquote slander? Because in the course of that article and this podcast, the one that we're reviewing, they never say what the misrepresentation is or the mischaracterization. Ever. They just say, that's a mischaracterization. Where? Why? Defend yourself. Defend your position.
And just listen for these words. Lying, slandering, I wrote these down. Lying, slandering, saying something stupid.
They said stupid like 5 or 6 times.
Stupid comments, yahoos writing stupid things. Listen for these things in here. These are such gracious people talking to those who disagree with them.
These are such gracious people lecturing us on being more gracious while they call us stupid like 5 or 6 times while never addressing the substance of our argument.
It is the most asinine thing from people. Again, it's like, dude, I thought you got to be smarter than this.
Marxist, why don't you go and read the last 10 years of writing that I've done?
Right.
Where I have laid out some of my positive opinions on key social justice issues. And go and try and fit me up as a social justice warrior on the basis of my positive writings that I've done in that area. As far as Tim Keller's a Marxist guy, I mean, we joked, I said, maybe I should do a piece on, Pope Francis is not a serial killer.
Right.
Which by the same kind of interpretive logic that some of my critics were using would presumably mean that I absolutely endorse it.
We're not using logic to demonstrate that Keller is a Marxist. We're using his own words.
Right.
There's a difference.
Yeah. If you found bodies in the Pope's closet, then maybe the Pope is a murderer, and there would be.
Yeah. If the Pope said in a book in 2008, Ted Bundy had a giant influence on the development of my worldview.
Yeah.
You would say, well, maybe he has some tendencies towards serial killing. But then if he added in a book
he'd be gracious.
14 that Jeffrey Dahmer cannibalizing those boys and stuffing their bodies in his basement was probably a good idea in accordance with biblical counsel and wisdom, then we would go so far as to say, at least he's pro serial killer. All right. Then you find a body, then you're like, well, he's a serial killer.
JD, it's so bad. I mean, this kind of line of thought, it's so bad. Again, a part of me which wants to giggle gleefully because it's just so silly, that it's funny.
By the way, I'll just live up to expectations here when it comes to the inflammatory rhetoric to which I am famous. If you did tell me the Pope was a serial killer, as a Protestant, I would probably say, I can see that. All right. But I would still need to see some, like, I get it. He probably eats babies. He is the Pope. But I would still need to see some evidence.
Right.
My belief is if you took the evidence against Tim Keller and you took it to any court of law, they wouldn't laugh. They wouldn't chuckle. They wouldn't be like, this is crazy. He would be convicted. Like, the evidence is clear as day, and these guys won't even address it.
Yeah, they won't even mention why is it that it's like we're, like saying the Pope is a serial killer. We're just coming up with stuff that has absolutely no basis in reality at all. And it's like, well, why don't you actually address some of the stuff we're concerned about? If you want to speak to this thing and bring some reconciliation where there might be some misunderstanding, if that's what you think that it is. But the reason he won't go there, brother, is because the moment he does, he gets neck deep in it.
Well, right. He's citing Gramsci. He's citing Gutierrez. He's citing in the nature and the destiny of man, and in every endeavor. These famous Marxists, and not only citing them, but he's like, I'm in agreement with them on how society should take care of the poor, which is by redistributing wealth. Well, he wants wealth redistribution.
What he tries to do is take that and make it meet theology. He takes it and tries to baptize it and create the real Christian version of it. And like in Generous Justice, for instance, early on in the book, he conflates justice and mercy. Outright just conflates the two. does not draw the distinction between justice and mercy in the scripture, but
that's becoming very common. We did a post just this week. It was a sermon review of J.D. Greer, and it was sent to us by a member of the Summit Church. And Greer was giving a short exposition of Micah 6:8, do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And in his sermon, he treated justice identically to mercy, as though that's the same thing. Now,
that's right out of generous justice.
We're beyond economics and politics at this point, and we're on to the gospel, aren't we? Because concepts of justice and mercy are essential in understanding the gospel. Jesus took our sin, all right, for us. Jesus actually got our justice. God punished our sin so that we could receive mercy. So, as I tell people at church, we have a food pantry, by the way. We have a food bank. We feed 2 or 3 families a day, or 2 or 3 people a day at least, on average. When we give someone a food box, I took someone a food box today. They're staying at the motel. They couldn't get out. I took them food. All right. Day before Thanksgiving, I get out. I take them food. I tell the church that's not social justice, because they don't deserve the food. They didn't work for the food. They're not entitled to the food. That's social mercy. We're not doing it because we ought, because we have to, I should say, as a matter of doing justice. We do it because we love God. We stir one another up to love and to good works, and we are merciful to the poor. That's not a matter of justice. Because if they start misconstruing justice and mercy, you get the gospel all discombobulated.
Well, and the living out of the gospel practically. I mean, if justice is that stuff that you got there is mine, justice isn't mine, then it's not mercy. There's no thankfulness. It's this whole idea of giving people what they have not labored for. It's not mercy. It's justice, and that creates the entitlement mindset. And
here's why social justice, cultural Marxism, the whole bit is so wrong. We're tempted to say what you just said, and you weren't wrong, but let me offer a caveat. When we say that's not mercy, that's justice. Giving someone what they don't deserve, that's not mercy, that's justice, or it's not justice, it's mercy. But here's the caveat. To forcefully take from one man, to give to another man, to redistribute wealth, which is very clearly what Keller wants. Right. I mean, there is zero doubt from his Twitter feed, zero. He wants the redistribution of wealth.
Go vote for justice for the inner cities.
Right.
Wasn't that one of his tweets?
That's not justice. That's injustice. That's a violation of the 8th commandment. That is theft, and God hates it. So it's not even justice. It's injustice.
Yeah.
Catholic Church.
Right.
It's a fairly narrow interest I had in that article.
Right.
And basically it comes down to 2 things. One, you don't help your position by mischaracterizing those you're criticizing.
Right.
And 2, if you're a Christian, you should try not to mischaracterize those you're criticizing, because actually you're meant to tell the truth.
Right.
You're meant to obey the 9th commandment.
Right.
I think Todd and I, we've both been on the receiving ends of slander in our ministries.
Exactly.
And I think that slander is rapidly becoming, in the Christian world, the acceptable sin.
Absolutely.
You can slander people and no one will hold you to account. Well, actually, it's one of the 10 commandments, like murder and adultery.
Right.
And I think that the
Hey, I was going to say, and theft. That's one of the 10 commandments too. Redistributing wealth is theft. If you go to Pulpit and Pen, you type in the term slander. It's a polemics term. Slander is a term that is improperly used by many who oppose discernment or criticism in a way that colloquial means it's something I don't like hearing, or it's something that is spoken or written that is ill of someone that I like. For example, if there's an article about Hillsong's church cover-up of homosexuals leading ministry, it's met with a response that the article is slanderous, even though it's true. That's not what slander is. Slander is to make a false spoken statement that causes people to have a bad opinion of someone. It needs to be false. And Truman never attempted, ever in the article or in this podcast, never attempted to say, here specifically is what's slander, other than he's not a Marxist because he's a theist.
You call Tim Keller a Marxist, you're slandering him.
Right.
But he can't tell you why that is. Why.
They're going to go on for a bit here, and Amy is going to so it's going to be hard not to interrupt, but I'd rather get through it. It's just piling on of victimology.
Let's roll.
My personal beef there was Tim Keller's being slandered at this point. I don't agree with him on a whole heap of stuff.
Right.
But I'm going to stand up for a man who's being slandered, as I would hope people would stand up for me in a similar situation.
Yeah, slander has now become.
Okay, I can't. Sorry, I wanted to get through it. I just want to point people to a resource. If you Google dissection of a downgrade, you'll see how downgrade ordinarily happens. Dissection of a downgrade, referring to Spurgeon's downgrade, the concept of doctrine being dumbed down. Dissection of a downgrade is when someone we like does something that is either sinful or stupid. And in a desire to defend them, which is understandable, we end up defending what it is they did that is sinful or stupid. That's how downgrade happens. So it always happens because someone we like did something and we want to defend them. That's natural. We want to say they're a good person. They meant well. They're not all bad. They say some good things. We get that. But instead of doing that, they defend what it is that they did. And then it spreads, right? People like Paige Patterson. Paige Patterson enrolls Muslims at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary as a part of an evangelism strategy. And people, like if you would have said, hey, do you think it's cool to enroll Muslims in a Southern Baptist seminary? People would go, you're out of your mind. But Paige Patterson does it, and people are like, well, hold on a second. I want to defend Patterson. Then they go on to defend the indefensible. Same thing here with Keller. Listen to Truman's words. I wanted to defend my brother against slander. Well, you could have said, he means well, and just because he's a commie doesn't mean he's a Christian, or not a Christian. You could have gone that far, all right? But you didn't. You accused us of slander and breaking the ninth commandment without ever trying to substantiate what it is that is a lie, because you can't.
It's really the pot calling the kettle black here.
The only thing slanderous that was said in this slandering.
Wait, say again?
The only thing that was slanderous said in this exchange at all is their accusation that we were slandering. Saying that we were breaking the ninth, because he's talking about us. Like the few people that are criticizing.
I mean, it's like somebody else out there talking to this stuff, because it's not like there's a lot of leaders in Reformdom who are standing for this stuff. So, I mean, it's like, I listen to this and I'm like, okay, surely they're not talking about me. Because
is Truman speaking at G3 this year? I don't know. They're even some of the good guys defend him and or at least silent in this. How many people are speaking up? Well, Pulpit and Pen's kind of the flagship, but there are others. I mean, No Compromise Radio is another one. There are others. But yeah, no, he's talking about us, and to say you're breaking the ninth commandment,
and
thou shalt not lie.
This, and it's not too different than what I've been saying on this. And I'm like, perhaps is there someone out there that I don't know that they're actually talking about?
No, they're talking about you.
Right.
They're talking about you. They're talking about me. They're talking about Abendroth. That's who they're talking about.
I'm going to push play again.
No, it's slander.
Or inventing it and then pretending it.
Right. And I think there's something that goes along with that dynamic too. And it's like, what they're really trying.
I don't want to listen to her. Can we just fast forward? I'll bear and grin it, but she's just such a squawk box. I don't know.
Does that make it better?
A little bit more tolerable.
Coming out of it. It's
lying without slandering and without saying stupid things. Just like you can offer some really help.
With all the slander, stupid things, troll speak, I forget what all the epithets they throw out here are.
First of all, when I insult someone, I try to do it with creative language. And they repeated the word stupid like 4 or 5 times, maybe more, maybe half a dozen times. Stupid, 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 stupid. The only thing that was said that was
you big dummy.
Yeah, you're dumb. You're not smart at all. You're so dumb, you're really dumb. That's their argument, like the meme. The only dumb thing that was said was that you can't be a Marxist if you're a theist, which is, again,
that was
ridiculously obtuse. I don't know what they're talking about, though, that's dumb, because they won't say it. And that's the thing. When you ask who else is out here criticizing them besides us, they won't say our name, brother. We are the name that shall not be named, because they act as though, if they give us attention, they're somehow helping, they're giving us a platform by responding to criticism. Well, it's just passive aggressive. Everybody knows who they're talking about. But because they're not specific, who knows? Now, if you're just a listener to Mortification of Spin or listener to their program, and all you know is their side, you're going to go, man, these people are out there saying such mean things and slandering. They're awful. They're bad. And you mark my words, 5 years from now, somebody in social media is going to say, you slandered Tim Keller. And why do you say that? Well, because Carl Truman said so. What's the slander? I don't know. They just believe it because it's said.
Yeah.
But intelligent critiques of some of the current emphasis on so-called social justice without lying, without slandering, and without saying stupid things. Just like you can offer some helpful critiques of some things that Tim Keller has written, which deserve a helpful critique, without lying, without slandering, and without saying something stupid.
And he could address many of the things that I and others have specifically brought forward as concerns with Tim Keller right out of his books. But alas, he does not.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a perennial problem in the church. It's not unique to our age. The mischaracterization of opponents is a hardy perennial of church history.
Yeah.
I think what we have today is that more and more people are able to do it in a public forum.
Right.
That you have Twitter, you have blogs, you have YouTube.
Yeah.
This is just hilarious. On their podcast, they're saying this about their blog.
Yeah.
It's like, boy, you guys are so elite to talk down to the other people on the internet using the very same medium to communicate as you are. I mean, the arrogance that is displayed in just the way that they talk about those people on the internet. I've had another popular teacher rag me and those like me who are speaking on the internet on his own little internet blog. It's just so silly.
Right. I can't count the number of times someone has said, you guys are just critics on the internet. Well, you just said that on the internet, man. You just said it on the internet.
Yeah.
Anybody can perform in public now, and that's problematic, and I think has meant that a problem that's always been there.
Even Carl Truman can do it.
This is why, listen to me, this is why new media should exist. This is why we continually have to have new forms of media. We thought that we were saved against mainstream media when talk radio became a thing. But then it had to go from talk radio to the internet. Sites like, say, Drudge Report, for example. All right. And not just network news, but cable news helped a lot. We continually need new forms of media to allow expression. Because of these guys, or the intelligentsia, they're the only ones entitled to speak. They're the only ones entitled to talk. Now, what drives them nuts is, I just looked it up, the Alliance for Confessing Evangelicals, their blog site, 167,000 on Alexa. All right. That's web ranking. Pulpit and Pen is 28,000. All right. So we've more than 10 times the readership. They can't stand that. They can't stand that pastors like you are able to get on Facebook and have your views heard. They want to do that on their podcast. So that's not even on the radio, right? It's just a podcast. But they're the only ones entitled to speak because they're the ones that are invited to conferences. Now, why should Amy Bird get to speak? She's a housewife. I don't even know. But it drives them nuts that we have a voice. We know what we're going to continue to have a voice, so they need to deal.
It's like they want to control the conversation, right? Well, I do have a tip for them if they're watching. There's something called gain when you record your audio there. Now, this is real. I'm just using my laptop here, so. But if you're actually doing a podcast where you have time to edit it and have everything nice and everything, their gain is like the reason this is sounding all kind of, is the recording has the gain all the way up into the red. So just a tip there for the folks at Mortification Spin: turn your gain down just a hair.
In front of the wider world, and I think it makes the church rather ugly. Without, please, let's not get lots of emails saying Truman's gone seeker sensitive at this point. Right. But I'm going to say that I don't think it's impressive to my decent non-Christian neighbors,
Right.
to see the kind of way that some Christians talk about other Christians on the internet. I don't think that some of the hateful things that are said, and I'm not using hate speech in that broad sense of, hey, if somebody disagrees with me,
Stop there.
Maybe calling people liars, slanderers, saying stupid stuff. Maybe he falls in that kind of category.
Maybe you shouldn't call us stupid 6 times in 10 minutes. Yeah, exactly right. I think what is happening is they're perceiving Marxist, the term, the nomenclature, as a pejorative.
Yeah.
I don't mean it as a pejorative.
Right.
I do mean commie as a pejorative. But when I say he's a Marxist, I mean literally he's an honest to goodness Marxist. I'm not calling him a name, I'm describing him.
Sometimes I've had people come back at me when I talk about my concern about progressive Marxism and stuff. And they're like, what are you talking about? I think you're just talking about like a boogeyman. Like you're just throwing that out there like it doesn't actually mean something. I'm like, have you listened to me? Have you followed me at all? Or is this the very first time you listen to Robert Truelove? And if that's the case, I'll give you a pass.
I've heard people, Pastor, say that cultural Marxism has been made up by the alt-right. And you're like, there are books by cultural Marxists entitled Cultural Marxism. This is nothing that we've made up. Kyle J. Howard said calling someone a Marxist is the new N-word, right? So they just want us to stop saying it. And it's not the new N-word. Calling someone the N-word is just a pejorative that is an attack on who they are, in terms of...
Marxists actually mean something. There's an ideology there that's identifiable.
I'm talking about real abusive, personal, direct, offensive speech. I'm not sure that that's consistent either with the Ninth Commandment or with Jesus' comment that by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, by the love that you have for each other.
Right.
You don't have to be some pious sentimentalist to think that Jesus is actually onto something there.
Carl Truman could love me enough and those like me, instead of saying Tim Keller's not a Marxist because he's a theist, by actually saying, I'm going to love my brothers enough who actually have a concern here to actually look at what their concerns are specifically and address them. But I haven't seen that kind of love.
Mm-hmm.
This teaching has significance in the present day.
Yeah, and part of what troubles me about the kind of irresponsible charges that are made, the slanderous charges that are made, the stupid comments that are made, is that those of us that do have what we believe is a legitimate concern about some of the things that are being said and written in terms of social justice, is that then we're put in a position to have to defend these folks that we disagree with, because you have some yahoos out there writing stupid things. And so, because of social media, there's this unhealthy egalitarianism where if I have an opinion, it's just as good as anybody else's opinion, whether I've actually read anything from this person or if I've just read a blog about them. But my opinion ought to be heard.
That is just asinine. I mean, here you go. You get on here and you do a 2.5 hour stream covering point after point after point of concerns with Tim Keller's writings, things he's actually said, people he's citing with great positive promotion of his world, in the line of his worldview, and then this, it's so absolutely
the only ones to point out evidence, facts, citations, quotations, evidence is us. They've not.
And truly hosed recently online relative to your last book.
Right.
I mean, Amy was sending, I don't do Twitter, but I do get the tweets sent to me by my beloved colleagues who are concerned that my blood pressure might be too low. And
right.
But I mean, Amy, you got thoroughly trashed. Of course, your daughter saw that.
Right. Teenagers are on Twitter. And so I would say probably that many Christian leaders, teenage children, are on Twitter. And to think that, you're saying these things about people and their children are reading it. Like I can read one thing and it might affect me to read it, but it's a total different kind of effect when I know that my children might see it.
Wow.
And it's a bad witness to my children too, because this whole social media outlet to kind of amplify tribalism.
Stop there for a second.
Tribal, as they circle the wagons, they're going to talk about.
Yeah. My children don't have Facebook or Twitter. My oldest is 15. She gets on her mom's Facebook sometimes. Mm-hmm. What do you think my kids see about me?
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah. Well, listen, brother.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to have the talk with my daughter and son, my older son, and say, okay, some people hate daddy. Some people really hate your father. If you can't deal with that, don't write books. I mean, I don't know what else to tell. Like, I'm totally sympathetic. I get it. I mean, I am sympathetic because I'm there. Like, I get it. But this is just special pleading. That's all this is. It's all emotional special pleading.
My children, as a minister and someone who speaks to things publicly on the internet or whatever, my kids have seen it. Now, my younger kids aren't on social media, but my 18 and 20-year-old are. They've seen it online, and they've seen it in person, face to face, as ministers' children. It comes along with being a public person and speaking to controversial issues. You're right, it is special pleading. I don't get on here and bellyache what my kids hear about me and people who are
addressing facts. It's just, and by the way, what is Amy's dumb book about men dating women that aren't their wives? By the way, that's what you call it when you go out to dinner with a woman who's not your wife, dating. What does her dumb book have to do with any of this conversation with Tim Keller? Yeah. I have no idea.
Well, because they're systematically addressing the meanies. Because people call Tim Keller a Marxist that say she is pressing egalitarianism and pitching ideas that are, quite frankly, wrong.
It's just
same people. That's the thing.
Strike me as funny. I can't get over the fact that they're talking about an unfortunate egalitarianism where people like me and you have a voice. And then Amy Bird's voice comes on, and I just want to facepalm myself into tomorrow and ask what's her
egalitarianism in the sense that they're talking is that we can
sit down and go ask your husband what they mean. I mean, this is why 1 Timothy 2:12 is in the Bible, man. Amy Bird.
But the whole thing about an unhealthy egalitarianism, again, what are they saying? It's that we have a voice. The egalitarianism is that we can have the same voice they can have by having a podcast, by doing live streaming, by doing whatever. And that's unfortunate that they don't have monopoly on the conversation.
These guys absolutely hate it. They get to go to conferences, all right, where they speak to anywhere from 150 to 1,000 people. You and I don't know what your views are, but I can get on a podcast and can go out to 10,000 people. They hate that. It's a great equalizer. They can't stand it. Wouldn't you think that the more voices out there, the better? You'd have to sift through the garbage, but like you don't have to do that anyway. Down at the bookstore or at the whoever's in the conference lineup, you got to do that anyway. And this is just intelligentsia uppityness. That's all this is.
It's very much like the progressive left out there in regards to how the dialogue goes down. We do not want real dialogue. We want a monologue. And what they're doing here is they are monologuing.
Yeah, exactly. That way they don't have to address the evidence and facts presented.
Right. Exactly.
Brother, I have like 10 more minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, I got probably like 4 minutes left of this.
All right, let's do it.
To this angry name calling, a lot of times anonymous accounts and things like that, so that you can be even more cruel without accountability and assign motives and things like this and never actually discuss the content. And I mean, that's the thing with the Tim Keller stuff. I mean, he's a well-known public figure in the Christian Reformed world and beyond. And he's written a lot of wonderful things. And so we need to think critically about and be able to, well, kind of like Alan Jacobs says in his book How to Think, we need to have loving hearts and healthy minds as we engage in all these things. And I will say one thing, I've had lots of people who are elders even hurl names at me and everything like that on social media. Mm-hmm. And one time when I said something,
maybe there's a reason.
Kind of disagree.
Maybe there's a reason.
Right.
Maybe there's a reason pastors in particular freaked out about your book, Amy. Maybe.
Or actually has written in an opposite point of view. Mm-hmm. And we were talking on the podcast, kind of maybe poking a little fun at that point of view, right. Even in a playful way. He emailed me a very kind email. He is a decent guy.
Right.
You know, he doesn't do that stuff.
Right.
Not only is he not a Marxist, he's fuzzy. He's warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, I think you have to remember as well that, you know, if you're going to call Tim Keller a Marxist and you're on the right, then you have to be prepared for the left to call you a white supremacist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't listen this far earlier. Okay. All right. I'm going to be nice because this is your shindig. Because I made him up if this was my program. All right. There is no comparison because he is an actual Marxist. This isn't a reach or a stretch. This is why this is a false comparison. It's not a reach. It's not a stretch, rather, to call him a commie. But it is a stretch to call someone a white supremacist just because they're on the right. We're not calling him a Marxist because he's on the left, although he is on the left.
How about this?
Thanks for admitting that.
How about this? As a minister speaking to this subject, again, I went over 2 hours sharing specific concerns and citations from Tim Keller and my concerns of why he has Marxist tendencies. And yet, if you're going to say, well, I could call Robert Truelove a white supremacist, well, you're going to have a really hard time pressing Robert Truelove as a white supremacist. If you have any idea what my ministry looks like out here in the real world, the whole white supremacist thing is not going to go far at all, just based on the evidence. You're not going to be able to cite a bunch of information that tend to think Robert Truelove is a white supremacist. You see right the opposite of that. So I mean, it's so bad.
Do you think that these three folks have considered the possibility that the reason why the Marxism accusations have stuck is because they're true? Or do you think they've even considered that it's a possibility that it's true? Do you think they've considered that the Marxism accusations have stuck because they're reasonable accusations? The reason why there's not a website out there about Robert Truelove being a white supremacist is because it's simply not reasonable. It's not reasonable. It is reasonable to say that Tim Keller is a Marxist because, you know, he's a Marxist.
Right. Well, certainly has some serious Marxist tendencies.
Okay, so I'm against social justice, so you're obviously a white supremacist.
Right.
That's how the polarized debate comes up. And it's mindless.
Right.
And it actually prevents you from getting at the real issues. Because as soon as you daub somebody as a Marxist or a white supremacist, the discussion's over, because we both know that neither of those two groups have a legitimate place at the table in Christian discussion.
Right.
So
hey,
I think
I'm thankful that Carl Truman just said that a Marxist doesn't have a legitimate place at the table.
Right.
Now it's going to be up to all the people listening to this to determine whether or not he's a Marxist. And if so, Carl Truman says he does not have a legitimate place at the table. What's interesting, though, is I think Tim Keller disagrees with Carl Truman that Marxists don't have a legitimate place at the table, because he's quoting he's quoting Gutierrez. He's quoting these Marxists favorably. So I'm pretty sure they have a seat of honor at Tim Keller's table, being communists and papists both.
Yeah.
That with the measure you measure it out, it will be measured back to.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just as skilled at doing this as the right.
It's almost like a threat, isn't it?
Right.
You don't want to be called white supremacist, do you? Mm-hmm. What do I care? You call me worse than that before breakfast this morning. I don't care. Like, you call me racist. All people, there's not a day goes by somebody doesn't call me racist. What do I care? I think these guys I think it's a subtle threat. It's like, you don't want to be called racist, do you? No, that doesn't work on me. I'm impervious to that.
Well, I'll tell you why it doesn't work on me either. And that is when it comes to these cultural trends that are assaulting the churches. I haven't just begun to stick the gospel flag in the ground in 2018. I have labored all of my pastoral ministry in churches that were just directly against the grain countercultural when it comes to standing on the authority of the Word of God and the truths of the Christian faith that run, again, contrary to this culture and broad evangelicalism. A lot of the abuses and problems in broad evangelicalism, I have been speaking against them since the first time I could ascend into a pulpit, as far as, where I've been coming from. So, I mean, so I have no illusions that anybody is going to ask me to ever speak at a G3 or any of these popular reformdom conferences or other groups. I actually had one woman one time say, "You need to speak at such and such conferences," and thought she could get me into a big broad evangelical conference because of her clout. She was a speaker and she's heard some of my teaching and stuff. And I said, look, they are not having Robert Truelove in that because
you cross James White. That's not going to happen.
Well, and if Robert Truelove goes there and Beth Moore is sharing the platform, then you're going to be hearing some things about Beth Moore that will get the shepherd's crook pulling me off the podium pretty quick. I'm not going to share the platform with heterodox and heretical individuals. I don't believe in promoting, with what little influence I have, those people who shouldn't be up there teaching. And that's the problem I have with these conferences where sometimes good men go and will share a platform with people that I don't get it. That's something I've never going to get.
Something out there is changing, and it's because of the internet. It used to be, if you wanted to hear, let's say John MacArthur, if you wanted to hear MacArthur, you had to go hear MacArthur. And he's probably not a good example for me to use because historically, like in the course of his ministry, he's not shared the stage with very many heretics. If he has, it's typically it's nothing ecclesiastical. Maybe a radio broadcasting thing or something. But people would go to conferences where there would be a good guy speaking, even though there's a bad guy speaking, because you got to. But anymore, why you can just tune in online and not listen. So what's happening is I know people that won't go to Shepherd's Conference this year because they don't want to hear Albert Mohler and Mark Dever again. I know a bunch of people that they're not registering for G3. They're just not doing it. They don't want to hear John Piper. And that's actually making these conferences more conservative. People know that. And by the way, it has the opposite effect too. It also puts all the liberals in one place. What's that?
When you say conservative, you mean smaller.
I mean theologically conservative. Like I guarantee you, Josh Bice feels the weight and pressure of having Piper at G3. He probably gets 10 emails a day from people going, "Please disinvite Piper." Mm-hmm. That's happening, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Why should I go to a conference and hear this nut job just to hear this good guy when I got sermon audio and I can listen to 55 sermons of his today before the day is out?
See, my concern too with a lot of these conferences where when good men speak, they lend their orthodoxy to the heretical or the heterodox. Maybe they're not heretical, but they're heterodox, the best to say of them. And a man's orthodoxy actually lends authority to another man's heterodoxy. And that's where
I was speaking in it's probably 2 months ago. I was speaking I don't want to drop names, but one of the most famous preachers in the world. And he said, "I'm not doing any more conferences. I'm just not, because of this issue, because there's always someone else on stage that I don't want to be a hyper separatist. I don't want to be a hyper separatist, but every place that invites me has some heretic on the stage. I can't do it anymore." And you know what I've noticed? there are these conferences where, and we're getting way sidetracked right now, but the people who organize them would never have that speaker come to their local church, but they'd have them come to a conference. Mm-hmm. I really don't think Josh Buice would have John Piper preach at his church. I could be wrong. And by the way, Josh Buice, great guy. Nothing wrong with Buice. I'm just making a point. There are a lot of times where you wouldn't have that person come speak at your church, but you let them come speak at a conference. And I think Christians need to seriously evaluate the place that conferences ought to play in their spiritual development. Let's just stop. There's a conference. How many? If Pulpit and Pen just spent our time talking about dumb conferences with heretics at it, I mean, it's all we would do every day.
I've never done conferences. I mean, not only not spoke at conferences, but I mean, I don't do conferences. I don't go to them. I had one time somebody's pressure me, a minister needs to go to one conference a year. And I'm like, show me that in scripture, because I've gotten my Reformed Baptist fraternal twice a year where I hear great sermons and messages, and my brothers there in my fraternal, but I have never been one of these conference goers where
I've had 3 invitations to speak at conferences recently. I've turned them all down. And after talking to my friend who pointed that out, the danger that conferences can play, I said, you know what? If it's not done at a local church for a local church, I'm not going. If a local church does it and they invite everyone else to come, I'll go. But if it's like, I'm not going to a hotel. I'm not going to a hotel ballroom anymore. I just don't want to do it. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just, who has time for that anyway?
But you know what? The fuel for a lot of these conferences is people are going to these big, broad evangelical kind of churches, even within Reformdom, and they're not really being fed. So they sort of see the conference of where they go and get some substantive teaching in their mind, because they don't get it anywhere else. But if you're in a church where the whole counsel of God is being preached and taught, you shouldn't need the supplementation of a conference. You should be doing things.
And that goes for the book industry too. The reason why these books are being peddled by Lifeway, and some of them, a few, are good, it's because they're being starved in the local church. And by the way, if you go to the typical pastor's Facebook page, you'll see quotations from any number of different circuit writing conference speakers. And I have to ask the question, like, I get it. I mean, other people say smart things that I quote, of course. But are you doing your own study, Pastor? Are you coming up with your own words? You preach your own sermons? Why do you got to be quoting Paul Tripp or somebody? Like, do your own work. Your people in your church ought to be satisfied, content, fed, generally speaking, with what's coming from their pulpit, because that's how God designed it, and that's how the church has worked for 2,000 years. Right. So if you're not doing that, maybe stop coaching your kids' softball team and start preparing your own sermons.
Start preaching. Let me push play.
We got way distracted.
What's confounded me is that there are plenty of ways to thoughtfully engage with Tim Keller. And again, he should be engaged with because he is of his enormous influence. So absolutely respond, engage. And there's plenty of things to offer thoughtful, sound, helpful criticism of some of his perspectives. There's a place for that. There's a need for that. But then when I see people tweeting out that literally that he is an apostate, a gospel-denying apostate, which I've seen those words tweeted out about Tim Keller, I just think, see, that ruins then any thoughtful engagement that could
deal
be
with
helpful.
The content of his writing,
Right.
And that's what critical thinking does.
Right. Which they've not dealt with the content of his writing at all. Have there been people tweet that he's a gospel-denying apostate? Probably.
I didn't say that.
Well, hold on a second. Before I throw some anonymous troll under the bus, I don't think I said that either. But he doesn't believe in a literal 6-day creation. I believe he's a neo-Socinian. And he thinks that Roman Catholics are Christians. Yeah, you're walking pretty close to the apostasy line in my book. Well, you're walking real close.
What I've said of Tim Keller and many like him is that they are representative of the current downgrade and apostasy of Reformed evangelicalism. That's different than saying they are apostate. Apostasy is the process of falling away. So one can be part, and that's very objective, because I don't have to say I know the state of his soul before God to say that men like him are part of the apostasy of modern evangelicalism. I'm not saying contemporary evangelicalism is apostate. I'm saying it is going that way. And I don't know. I've said on occasions, and I don't know that they draw the distinction between. There is a difference between acknowledging there is a falling away going on right now,
right,
versus it's all not Christian anymore.
To put it this way, brother, there's a difference between falling away and being fallen away.
Right. That's right. Rome is apostate.
Right.
Contemporary Reformed evangelicalism is in the process of apostatizing. They are falling. But Lord willing, God.
I think Roman Catholics or Christians like Tim Keller does, I have the right to question your belief of justification by faith alone. Sure. Mark it down. So
the place to deal with that is the courts of the church. Mm-hmm. It's not really for any individual to declare a man to be apostate. We might say that his teaching is erroneous. I do think that its public teaching is subject to public scrutiny. Absolutely. Am I right? Maybe something I've written is erroneous. I'm open to that. But to declare a man apostate, to make a statement about his apparent eternal destiny, if you're right, that's the task of the church. That's not for any individual.
Hey, Robert, I've got to go. I had my links open. I was ready to talk about the citations that are provided in all these various places online from Generous Justice, from In Every Good Endeavor, from The Reason for Belief, all these things. What he said about these communist and Marxist philosophers, the tweets that he's given that have been, clearly Marxist. Any political scientist would tell you. Because I didn't listen to the last few minutes of the podcast, I thought he might get around to it, and I'd be able to say, "Oh, great, here's the evidence." But it sounds like you listen to the whole thing. Is it just more of the same? It sounds like,
that's the end right there. That pretty much is the closing thought.
So it was just a wagging finger this whole time. Shame on you guys.
The whole thing. You're stupid. You're slanderous. Bloody, 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 bloody.
Sounds so smart when it's coming out of a British accent, though, doesn't it? I can't believe that you would call Tim Keller a Marxist.
It's just, the whole thing is so silly because, again, for me, I'm like, I know you're not this unintelligent. I know you got to know more than what you are communicating in that blog post and in this podcast. And
he didn't communicate any thoughts. He communicated emotions. His feelings were hurt because a lot of people criticized him, some of them very loudly, like at Pulpit and Pen and whoever else. His feelings were hurt. It was emotive tonight. It wasn't intellectual, or in this podcast, it wasn't intellectual. It was just emotive.
But if you're going to come out and you're going to be charging people with slander and being stupid and all these other things, then you really need to put some substance out there. You really need to deal with the issues. Just like Amy Bird said, you got to talk to the issues. And, well, we have. That's the whole nature of our speaking to this thing.
Right.
And it's why, if you're going to talk like this, you need to unpack the issues and not just simply throw out I've been mistreated, my children have had a bad witness, with people who criticize me. These people have been stupid, slanderers. They don't even, they're throwing out this Marxist claim with absolutely no substantiation to it. And again, which leads me to say, well, are they talking about somebody else? Because we've actually been talking about the actual issues. But I just can't think that they would be responding to people who are not putting any substance for. Why even address this if the only people speaking to this are people who have absolutely no substance to whatever their concerns are?
listening to them talk about it, it would be like me talking about, vegan diet recipes. I'm out of my element, you know. And so to reiterate for the people watching this, Truman's claim was you have to be an atheist to be a Marxist, and if he's not a classical Marxist, he can't be any other kind of Marxist. Therefore, he's not a Marxist because he's a theist. And what we need to demonstrate is cultural Marxism has been a well-defined term for half a century. It was founded by a theist. Liberation theology, which is a tenet of Marxism, intrinsically tied, comes from Roman Catholics in South America, Jesuits, who are theists. And by really any discernible standard, from the words of the Pope, so much so that he got a hammer and sickle crucifix, if you've seen that photo.
I saw that.
The Pope of Rome is a Marxist. Furthermore, we know that theists can be Marxists because if you look at what Marxism is about, which is a belief that you are only impoverished by systemic injustice, and it's just to redistribute wealth, then it's possible to be a Marxist and a theist because Tim Keller is both.
Mm-hmm. I think what we're seeing is the Me Too evangelical Marxist movement. What I mean by that is you've got what the political left in America is doing, the unbelieving left, and then you've got this movement from within evangelicalism that's sort of like, we can do this better than you guys. They don't want to call it Marxism, but when you look at the social justice stuff and the gender issues and even the homosexuality issue with Revoice and Living Out, you see all this. It's like, this is the evangelical version of what the world is doing. It's that worldly message baptized under the guise of Reformed evangelicalism, and it's just as unbiblical. As a matter of fact, I would say it's more unbiblical because it's exceedingly deceptive. Leading people down this path to think that this sort of thing actually is compatible with Christianity. And as Truman said, Marxism is not compatible with Christianity. Amen. I think we could agree with that. But yet what they're not getting is how these things are being joined under this evangelical spinoff application of the same type ideology.
Hey, keep talking for another 30 seconds. I'm Googling some. I want to end with a quotation, if I could, from Spurgeon.
Okay. So I'll let you find that quotation. I'll let you have the final comment. So while he looks that up, for those who have followed us up to this point, I want to just again share my concern here as a minister of the gospel of Christ, as a Reformed pastor. This is not a benign subject. This isn't an area of just minor disagreement. The damage that these things are doing inside of Reformed evangelicalism are the most destructive forces of my lifetime, easily. Perhaps the most destructive forces within, again, Reformed confessional evangelicalism. You may think I'm stretching it, but in the history of our country, I mean, this, as I see it, this really is ultimately the undoing of Orthodox Reformed Christianity if this is allowed to play out to its logical end in our churches.
Yeah, the quotation I was looking at was from Spurgeon's downgrade controversy, and I can't remember if this was written by Spurgeon, this particular article, or if it was written by Robert Schindler, who kicked off the downgrade articles. I think this was in Spurgeon's retort. But he says, so many people are willing to overlook error so long as it is committed by a clever man and a good-hearted brother. If that doesn't speak of Tim Keller, I don't know what does. From Spurgeon's downgrade, so many people are willing to overlook error so long as it is committed by a clever man and a good-natured brother.
Well, there it is. So I hope this was profitable for those of you who have borne with us and seen the whole thing. I hope that God will bless you in your discernment as you think and pray through these things, and as you evaluate what's going on in your own churches. We are at a place in our country and in our churches where, the faithful have got to stand. It's no longer appropriate to sit by silently and allow these things to go down. Faithful men of God need to stand up and be speaking to these things. And, I exhort all of you out there who are ministers to stand. I have not been a political preacher for the bulk of my ministry as far as talking to politics. And I pretty much preached the scripture, preached the whole counsel of God. Over the last 2 years, I've had to really get in this particular spectrum and start addressing these things that people would say are more cultural / political, because it's invading the church. Before, it was always out there. It was always out there in the political left, and it wasn't something you would expect to see coming in confessional Reformed churches. But as I've seen it over the last couple of years invading the church, I've had to step up and speak. I think it would be cowardly and unfaithful as a minister not to. So you got any closing thought there, brother? That's it.
I don't. Thanks for letting me join you tonight. This will save me time. I was going to cover this on Polemics Report, but I don't guess I have to now. So I appreciate the time, Robert. Sure do. And I pray blessing upon your ministry and just grace and peace to everybody that listens to what you have to say.
Likewise. Blessings on you, brother, and the church there. And until next time, God bless.